as part of that final programming, we're happy to have Dr. Cheryl Grill, former commissioner with the California Reparations Task Force, Chairman Ward, who's the curator of the exhibition, and also the mother and daughter duo from House of Amma. So, it's been a pleasure for Zeal and for myself to be able to produce this exhibition featuring our artist, Benga Kamalafe, who's here, and Leah King also is in the back, and also Anandi Jordan, who are the three other artists that are part of the show. Really in honor of the task force and the work that has been happening the past 2 years here in the state of California, as it's the first state in the nation to stand up a process for proposals and recommendations on what a comprehensive reparations program can look like. And so it gives us the North Star for not only what processes can look like for Black people here, but also globally. And so we thought it would be fitting to create an exhibition talking about restoration and remembrance and remedy and redemption for Black people. And so I think I'll Lucille Clifton quote that you picked is very fitting, that we have up here on the wall: who among us can imagine ourselves unimagined? And so throughout the time that we've been here, through the exhibition's tenure, we've been able to have family days, art book making workshops, right? We have been able to have discussions about what reparations feels and looks like to us. And now that we actually also have one of the commissioners here from the state of California's task force, I think it's also good to weave in what is possible with the process that has been put forward of the recommendations and proposals, given that there's now a final report that moves us still into imagining and also into action around what we can also do along who we can be and who we're becoming. That I feel like the exhibition also speaks to. And I wanted to be able to give the panelists the opportunity to introduce themselves. And then also just like a prompt question around, especially for you, Dr. Cheryl, since you're just coming into the exhibition and seeing it for yourself. Just what's pulling at you as you just are observing and looking around at the pieces. I know you got to see the short the House of Amma just did, Saltwater. So just introduction and just what's calling at you with this exhibition as you're observing and looking throughout the space. So you can go first and then pass it on. Yeah.
So good afternoon, everyone. So I'm as Alan, I use his name, indicated, I was, just ended, a member of the California Reparations Task Force. I was a governor appointee. I'm also a member of the National African American Reparations Coalition, which is more focused on federal reparations, and a national past president of the Association of Black Psychologists. I'm a psychologist by training, and so I tend to look at things through a psychological lens. And I think that a few things stuck out for me, actually. And I should say I'm not just a psychologist, I'm an African-centered psychologist. I do a lot of my work on African psychology. And so I understand human behavior through an African lens as opposed to Western psychology and how they approach understanding and intervening in human behavior. That being said, to be human is to also be divine from an African perspective.
It is.
Yes. And that we are essentially extensions of the divine. And so when we walk this world, we are walking not as individuals, but as part of a community. And that community is not just who's in the mundane world, but also the spiritual realm, right? And so a lot of that African essence of who we are as spirits, having an embodied experience in the concrete world. A lot of that kind of spoke to me. And I love the short that looks at, but that it lifts up Yemaya and the other Orishas and the significance of water to who we are as human beings from an African perspective really kind of came through for me. And water is, not only was it a place that we went in search of our liberation under the Underground Railroad, and I actually just got back this morning from Detroit, and I looked out on the Detroit River, and you could see, on this side is the U.S., and across the river, which is not that far across, is Canada. And that spot where we were at, the convention of the Association of Black Psychologists, was a pathway on the Underground Railroad. And so water has a lot to do with liberation, but water also has a lot to do with spirituality, because there are so many powerful and healing spirits from the water. So I was so glad to see that. So in part what that was saying to me is that reparations is perhaps a pathway for us to go back to who we are.
Nice.
The other thing that really, there are two other things that spoke to me, and I'm sounding like a professor, so stop.
No, it's good. Yeah, I was inspired.
One of the other things that spoke to me is there's a kind of an emphasis, or intentional or not, I don't know, on our heads, right? And in some instances, they're kind of out of alignment. In some cases, they're totally disconnected. And in some instances, they're kind of glorified, beautified, like with the roses. And with the child picture back there, that one really got to me because it represented both the opportunity for our children to do what we call their inyemyam, the radiance of their face, and let their gifts go out into the world. But at the same time, in this anti-African context that we're in the US, it also represented all the negativity that could be poured into them, and essentially tarnishing what are clean vessels in our children. And so I think this notion about the heads, for me as a psychologist, is that part of the damage of enslavement and post-enslavement oppression has been the havoc wreaked on our minds, turning us, inside out and upside down, so we don't know what's real, what's not. Is it me? Is it, that I'm not advancing, that I'm not having access to things? Or is it, a crazy system, an unjust system that I'm dealing with? So racism is crazy making for us. And all of the stereotypes and memes, et cetera, about, who we, falsely stating who we are, at some point, no matter how much you try to fend that off, if you're getting it steady doses, 7 days a week, 52 weeks a year, 365 days a year, across 400, actually 600 generations. I'm sorry, but some of it's going to penetrate. Some of that anti-Black narrative is going to penetrate. It's going to get internalized, and it's going to end up defining how we see ourselves and how we see each other and how we see other groups in relationship to us. And so that the work of reparations is, there are certain kinds of repairs that need to happen legislatively, monetarily, etc. But a large measure of the repair has to happen in here, in our spirit, in our hearts, and in our souls. Because I think all the way down to our very souls have been compromised by the system that we've had to contend with.
Triana Ward. I want to say it's a pleasure to meet you. Thank you so much for coming. I'm the curator of the show. I was invited by Alan and Seal to collaborate with these artists, and I brought in House of Alma. I'm also in the video art space, so I'm very interested in making exhibitions as dynamic as possible. And what I'm taking away from the show. I'm glad we extended it. But it's been really interesting to hear everyone's perspectives on how the show is outlined, right, or how the exhibition is designed, and thinking about because it was a collaborative effort too, which I really appreciated. Even the quote, something was poem that Leah brought up, and for me, I love how the show wasn't necessarily something you walk in and you immediately think of reparations. So it takes a second to really sit with the work and to really think about the artists. And even though it was a set group that was already predetermined in the way, I feel there still was a universe sort of curation that went into it, right? Bringing all these artists together. And yeah, I think the importance of water too, that's super central to my practice. So the artist residency I founded was called Mare, which is Latin for sea, because of the importance of water for us in the diaspora. What was the last?
I feel like you've pretty much covered it, but what you have learned from the time you started versus now, when you started the exhibition and everything was in the space, and now that you're here.
I think belief in self. Because I definitely was I had just come off a exhibition in Baltimore where I collaborated with someone, and I do have an MFA in curatorial practice, which is kind of a nebulous sort of thing, but I have it, and I did have good schooling. But sometimes I still get oh, can I really do this? I'm not an exhibition designer, and just letting that go and just moving with spirit. And I think at the very beginning of the exhibition, I was in a space of perfect is the opposite of done. And so working through that process of just of letting things be and that it's not a show about my curatorial work. It's a show about the artists. It's a show about the message. It's a show about the community. It's a show about supporting reparations and conversation.
I think that the continuity of the work and the fact that I am now in this space with my daughter and we have a legacy brand, we're not just making clothing. We are using clothing as a vehicle to explore ancestral remembrance and our status and our position of our people here on the shores. And so when we talk about restoration, when we talk about remembrance, when we talk about reparations, it's very key to our work because we're very, very specifically focused on the Black experience. And in that Black experience, we're talking about that continuum from the continent through the Caribbean to the islands and ending up in the southern United States. We really look at the southern United States and the islands as one mass, like Dr. Imani Perry talks about. It's the global South. That is also our personal legacy in our family, coming from the South of Louisiana, South Carolina, and on my daughter's side, the Cuban, the Jamaican, add addition to that. And so I think that in this space and time and in this exhibit, we were able to really explore and allow the ancestors really to speak to us. You see in the saltwater video that we made in conjunction with a collection called Saltwater, the exploration of that theme and dealing with water, just as you picked up and how central that was in terms of the maintenance of our identity and our restoration and our survival here on the shores. And so that's why we are dealing with those deities, Rosarine, Ogwe, Molucum. All of that is included in there, as well as others, because we're specifically calling and focusing on them. Other people call them Medusa, other people call them, you see it all over Dolce & Gabbana and all over these other brands, but we are specifically calling forth and bringing forth that which is in our ancestral memory and our ancestral heritage, and which is actually asking to be seen. And so we are really focused on bringing that forth and continuing that work. We really center ourselves and see ourselves as folkloricists, continuing in the vein of Zora Neale Hurston as anthropologists. And this is our work and our offering that we're making to our community.
I feel like being a part of this exhibition is really interesting because, like, on the opening night, one of the first things that was said by someone that watched the film was, "Oh my goodness!" And I keep talking to Ishmael about this because we're discussing so many other things. But people were like, "I want to go to Camp Bamba," and like Camp Bamba is essentially like the fictional resort community that we created that you're seeing in the film. And when someone said that, it really clicked to me about just the experience even coming into the exhibit and how the other work plays into just this reimagining. And on our first like opening panel, we talked a lot about the quote and talking about us reimagining ourselves and who has the power to do that and who doesn't, and reclaiming that power. And when I'm looking at the different work in the exhibit, it makes me think about just this world that we're trying to create for ourselves and the fact that we have the power to do it, and also being aware of the other players at play. And so it's just been really interesting being a part of it because it's really sparked new ideas for us a lot in terms of the importance of intentional space and activation and experience, and how we can incorporate that through these various mediums. And I mean, one of the works that I was drawn to the first day was your work right here. And I was specifically thinking about South Carolina, thinking about indigo, thinking about bottle trees, and just thinking about the world of that work and how that in so many ways connects to our work. And so I think that it's been beautifully curated, and I think also it feels like just the beginning of creating more of these spaces and creating this conversation. Yeah.
For those who may not know a little bit about the task force, we launched in June of 2021, and we went for 2 years, so we just sunset on July 1st of this year. In that 2-year span, we held 16 or 17 public hearings. Most of them were 2 days long, and they always started with public comment so that we could get community input. Halfway through the process, a year in, we released an interim report that laid out the harms from enslavement through to the present. And what that did was to show that we've essentially gone uninterrupted in racial oppression in this country. And it shows that, the original kind of tactics and strategies didn't leave us, they just morphed and mutated over time. And so very likely, and I always like to say, if you don't understand the past, the present will simply confuse you. If we understood that historical past, it will illuminate a lot about what's going on today, which is, I think, why some parts of this country want to erase the real history. It reveals too much. It also, so anyway, I'm about to go off on a tangent. Okay. All right. So one of the other things that we did as a task force that I think was very important was that community input was really important. It was very important to me. I do a lot of my research work with community organizers. So, for the last 30-something years. And so what we did was we joined forces, if you will, with the Ralph Bunche Center at UCLA. And they managed 2 things for us. A series of community listening sessions. We had 17 listening sessions with over 800 people across the state in the Black community participating, sharing their thoughts about various issues related to reparations. We also did a poll that included a community survey that had over 4,000 respondents. not just with the African American community for the poll, that was across racial groups and across the state. And one of the things that was important from that was that it, unlike the Pew poll, which everybody likes to point to, the Pew poll says America is not with this reparations. Well, the California poll said something very different, that people actually were open to, were not against reparations for Black folk. There, you know, people weren't also, as some might, you know, be led to believe because of who showed up the most at our hearings. You know, not everybody is for just cash payments. That the real, if we are going to do the 7 generations thing, if we are going to do something that lasts into perpetuity, then we got to change the structure and the functions of a lot of things in America. And so the bulk of our over 115 recommendations covers just about everything that you can think of that touches Black life and shows where the fault lines are, what needs to change.
I think it's important to have, like, maybe we can use art as a way to engage people around this conversation, around reparations, like art and education, right? And that's really like the crux of my practice as a curator, as a publisher, as a writer. And like I was thinking about how there's a Twitter back and forth right now about, or I guess it's actually a national conversation about whether or not Africans were skilled when they came here. Yeah. I mean, and I think on the high level, there's like definitely like a Black intellectual class. It's like, well, of course they were, like, you know, and that's very important. But I think what is being left out is that some Black people didn't know that, right? Like, I didn't know that Senegalese rice farmers were specifically taken to South Carolina.
Yes.
Right? And so there has to be, we have to meet everyone where they are. And I think that also gives us, I feel like that does more for me in terms of seeing our humanity than like we were kings and queens kind of thing. I mean, that's a tangent, but.
Everyone that roles and functions to play.
Exactly. But yeah, I think just education and as much, there's definitely like a emphasis on nationalism that I think is unhelpful on the anti-reparations conversation for people that are supposedly our kinfolk.
I think that a critical one, though, is the question and the issue of identity and who we are.
Yeah.
Just centrally who we are as people. Who we are. Just who are we walking this earth? And who are we walking this earth with? And I think that in order to even deal with some of the other redress, even educational, monetary, or whatever these other redresses are, you don't have a real clear understanding of who you are. You just might not get traction out of some of the other remedies that you would really need to get. I think that, I mean, to some extent, I think that you need to set up institutions that can provide that information and that instruction almost as if you're having to do, you know, like a reverse brainwash on your own people. Because of so much that we're carrying that doesn't have anything to do with us and is oppressive to our spirit. So that's where the psychologists come in. That's where the professionals come in that can deal with aspects of identity and cultural identity so that we can emerge out of a redress understanding who we are.